I'm pleased to call to order the second meeting of the Cannabis Control Board and to welcome all of you who are watching virtually. It is our hope that in the near future, we will be able to safely have these meetings in person. For our members and guests, this meeting will be recorded, and the recording and transcript will be available to the public on the Office of Cannabis Management's website, cannabis.ny.gov. Today's agenda will include a welcome and some brief remarks from me, review and approval of the meeting minutes from our first board meeting held on October 5th, a review of the OCM employment items, consideration of medical cannabis program regulations, a report from the Office of Cannabis Management's Executive Director, Chris Alexander, a brief update on outreach and education, an announcement about the next Cannabis Control Board meeting, and then we will adjourn. As previously stated, the first Cannabis Control Board meeting was held on Tuesday, October 5th, 2021. The board, OCM team, sure we maintain momentum, thus we work diligently to schedule this meeting today. I'd like to provide you with an update on what we've been working on since the first meeting of the Cannabis Control Board within our three key priorities: staffing, stakeholder engagement, and meeting our statutory requirements. First, as it relates to staffing, the executive director and I have continued to focus on bringing top talent to the Office of Cannabis Management. We have been busy canvassing, reviewing resumes, and interviewing. We want to thank the public for the tremendous interest in working for the amount of interest that they have expressed for working at the Office of Cannabis Management. It has allowed us to recruit a team of energetic, enthusiastic, and highly trained candidates for the office. We also have continued to work with our partners in government to ensure a smooth transition of DOH staff to the new OCM office. The transition is currently underway. I have had the privilege of meeting and getting to know some of the medical and cannabinoid hemp program staff over the past couple of weeks, and I want to thank them for their tireless work in managing these important programs. There is a tremendous amount of knowledge and subject matter expertise which they are bringing with them to OCM, and that will carry the office forward. And I'm looking forward to continuing our work together. Next, our work to engage stakeholders is just getting started. I made my first official public appearance since being appointed Cannabis Control Board Chair at the New York State Association of Counties meeting last week. Additionally, I conducted site visits to cultivation and processing facilities in the Mid-Hudson and Capital regions with fellow board member Jen Metzger. As our office continues to grow and our operations expand, we are dedicated to being in more communities for conversations around this new industry. We look forward to having you join us for discussions regarding how this industry will impact health, safety, equity, and economic development. Your engagement and input will help shape our state's future. Lastly, but certainly not least, is our responsibility to meet the statutory obligations under the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. In an effort to meet these obligations, the office has prioritized drafting the medical home cultivation regulations. These regulations, designed to help expand patient access, will be posted for public comment shortly. Executive Director Chris Alexander and I will speak more on this later. I'd like to make another point about the statutory requirements of the MRTA. One of the primary goals of legalization is harm reduction, ensuring access to safe, tested, regulated cannabis products. As a reminder to all, we do not yet have state-regulated adult use cannabis products on the market. We have not authorized recreational sales. We are hearing many examples of sales of marijuana products by individual vendors and retail locations. However, they are not licensed, nor are they selling regulated products. There are currently 38 medical dispensing facilities across the state. We do not have any adult use nor recreational dispensaries. Any individual selling cannabis or marijuana products in these unlicensed dispensaries, pop-up shops, or markets is not licensed, nor are they selling safe, tested products. I also wanted to share that any unlicensed sale or distribution of cannabis remains illegal, while gifting or transferring cannabis under the possession limit between adults who are 21 years or older without any money paid for or services provided is legal. Gifting does not include instances in which cannabis is given away at the same time as another transaction, nor when it is offered or advertised in conjunction with an offer for the sale of goods or services. There are no legal producers of cannabis other than those whose production is intended for medicinal use. The cannabis being exchanged in the transactions just described, those remain illicit. There is no gray market in New York State. This conduct is not legal and must stop. Individuals who do not cease run the risk of severe financial penalties. We look forward to providing updates to the public as we work towards accepting licenses in the future for the new legal industry we are building. The next order of business is the review and approval of the meeting minutes from the October 5th full Cannabis Control Board meeting. Before we get too much further into today's proceedings, I'd like to make a few brief remarks about the open meetings law. As stated at our first board meeting, the Cannabis Control Board is subject to the open meetings law, which is intended to ensure the greatest levels of transparency and public participation in the affairs of government. Due to the ongoing pandemic, we have requested that members of the public join us via video conference, which we will continue to do to keep the public and members of this body safe. Now I'll read a brief statement on open meetings law into the record. Pursuant to Chapter 417 of the laws of 2021, enacted on September 2nd, 2021, board members may fully participate in meetings via video conference from locations that are not open to the public, provided that the public has the ability to view or listen to such proceedings, and the meetings are recorded and later transcribed. The new law sunsets on January 15th, 2022. The public was provided with information on how to access the meeting within the public notice. A recording of this meeting, together with the transcripts, will be available on the OCM website. Previous recordings and transcripts are archived on the OCM website as well. Please note, there is a designated tab on the website entitled Board Meetings, where this information is shared and stored. Taking a moment to appreciate that virtual accommodations have been serving us well thus far, that we have had over 2,600 individuals tune in to our last meeting. And we are remotely hosting board member Adam Perry from his office in Buffalo today. How are you? I would now like to move to approve the meeting minutes from the October 5th Cannabis Control meeting.
I move approval.
We have a motion. Can we be second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All in favor. Thank you. No opposition, no abstentions. Board members, before you is a package of 6 potential hires representing senior positions of the Office of Cannabis Management. These candidates have been recommended by the Executive Director, and their resumes and bios have been shared with you ahead of this meeting. May I present Resolution 2021-05, affirming the staffing recommendations of the Executive Director. Is there any discussion? Checking in with our remote board member, Mr. Perry. Any discussion?
No, no discussion.
May I have a motion to accept the resolution before us?
I'll make that motion.
Second?
Second.
Second by Member Garcia. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposition? No abstentions. So Resolution 2021-05 passes. The next item on the agenda pertains to home grow, which further expands the medical cannabis program. The MRTA permits home cultivation of medical cannabis for patients in the medical cannabis program and imposed a 6-month deadline for the board to issue regulations outlining this process. Today, we are proud to present those proposed regulations. The home cultivation of medical cannabis will provide certified patients with a cost-effective means of obtaining cannabis through personal cultivation, while creating a set of standards governing the conduct and activities relating to the personal cultivation of cannabis in line with the MRTA. A few key provisions to share about the regulations are on the slide before you, including certified patients must be 21 years of age and older to home grow cannabis with a limit of 6 plants per patient, comprised of 3 mature and 3 immature plants. And please note, no household may cultivate more than 12 plants total, irrespective of the number of patients or individuals living therein. Designated caregivers caring for patients under 21 years of age or whose physical or cognitive impairments prevent them from cultivating cannabis may cultivate on behalf of the certified patient. And in line with the restrictions for individuals who grow their own cannabis, designated caregivers can cultivate no more than 6 cannabis plants for any patient. However, caregivers cultivating for multiple patients may cultivate 1 additional cannabis plant for each subsequent patient. The proposed regulations impose a duty on patients to take reasonable measures to ensure that cannabis plants and any cannabis cultivated from such plants is not readily accessible to anyone under the age of 21. That means safe and responsible storage of the cannabis grown, as well as a responsibility to make sure the cultivation is performed out of reach and out of sight of youth. The proposed regulations are also necessary to set parameters regarding the processing of cannabis cultivated by certified patients and designated caregivers by prohibiting the use of any liquid or gas other than alcohol that has a flash point below 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It's important to note that home cultivation for personal use for those not in the medical program is not permitted at this time. At this time, I want to make sure you are aware of the regulatory process in New York State. Assuming the board passes the proposed resolution to release the regulations, these regulations will then be published on the Department of State's Register, and a link will be made available on the OCM site. Once published, the regulations will be available for a 60-day public comment period. During this time, the public may submit comments to the Office of Cannabis Management on the details of the regulations. The office will be updating its website to include information on how to submit a public comment. Following the public comment period, the office will conduct an assessment of all comments received and adjust the regulations as needed. Thereafter, the regulations will be officially filed. At this time, I'd like to offer the board an opportunity to ask Executive Director Chris Alexander a few questions on the proposed home cultivation of medical cannabis regulations. Jen Metzger?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The regulations state that the cultivation of cannabis for personal use may only occur in or on the grounds of a person's private residence. And I just want to clarify and be sure that the addition of on the grounds is intended, to clarify that home cultivation of cannabis can occur outdoors.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you for your question. The home cultivation of medical cannabis by certified patients or their designated caregivers can occur outdoors, provided that the other requirements of the proposed regulations, such as not being plainly viewed from the public, by the public, including reasonable security devices, are adhered to, are being adhered to.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Member
Chair.
Garcia?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chris, the regulation package covers both medical and personal home cultivation for adults 21 and older. Does that mean that once these regulations are effective, everyone over 21 can grow at home?
No. Only certified patients or their designated caregivers participating in the medical cannabis program will be able to purchase seeds or immature plants legally from a registered organization. And therefore, New Yorkers who are not in the medical program cannot yet grow at home.
Thanks, Chris. I actually have a follow-up. After the board votes to file these regulations, will they take effect immediately?
No. After the filing, after the board approves these regulations moving forward, there will be a 60-day public comment period complying with the requirements of the New York State Administrative Procedure Act. Comments are strongly encouraged as public feedback is an extremely important aspect for this topic. The office will then create a mechanism to submit public comments on the website. But please be on the lookout for that communication. After the public comment period, we will review the comments, potentially make changes based on those comments, and then send the final version to the board for approval. Updates on this process will be provided at subsequent meetings.
Any additional questions? Metzger and then McDaniel.
Okay. Chris, could you just clarify whether a medical home grow participant can sell or trade any of the surplus?
No problem. I want to be very clear. The unlicensed sale or trading of cannabis is prohibited in New York, and home grow is not a license to do either. New York State, as the chair said, has not issued any licenses for adult use. This includes the sale or trade of cannabis cultivated under the home grow provisions, as well as the idea of gifting that we have seen cropping up across the state, where a seller claims to be providing cannabis as a gift after selling another commodity or service. That, nor any other unlicensed sale, is not allowed under the law, and we'll be working with our local partners to enforce it. Anyone partaking in this activity must stop.
Member McDaniel.
Thank you. Chris, my question is about the landlords. Most people in New York City lease. And so there's some discussion here about what landlords can and cannot do as far as preventing people from growing medical or home marijuana. Can you just talk about that a little bit, expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. The MRTA includes a discrimination clause that prohibits discrimination by landlords based on the appearance of use, actual use, participation in the industry or in the market, and that restricts their ability to deny somebody with a lease for those reasons. That being said, they can include in their lease a restriction on the ability to cultivate at home. But they cannot prevent a patient from participating in the medical program writ large. There still is space as well for landlords to have smoke-free policies on their places of residence, but folks are protected from discrimination stemming from their participation in their market.
Thank you.
Do you have another?
I have another, yeah. Could you just talk a little bit more about why the proposed regulations pose a limit on the number of plants a patient can grow?
Sure thing. The MRTA sets a maximum allowable number of plants at 3 mature and 3 immature. So that was a statutory requirement. We're following the law's direction there.
Any additional questions? Metzger?
One more. Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So the draft regulations have an important safety provision, and I'd just like you to talk about it a little bit. It's basically patients and caregivers can, let's see, they're not permitted to process home cultivated cannabis by means of any liquid or gas other than alcohol that has a flash point below 100 degrees. If you could just talk about why that provision specifically is included.
Absolutely. The MRTA prohibits the use of some of these dangerous chemicals in the processing of cannabis at home, particularly butane and some of the other dangerous items that we've seen used by folks in home processing. But the use of these chemicals really should only be done in a controlled environment and not at home. And you can hurt yourself and others. And sophisticated processing techniques involving some of these flammable solvents should be left to licensed entities that have the proper safety mechanisms in place. In other states, we've seen over the years significant accidents, home explosions using some of these items. So we've taken a step to restrict that activity.
That's what a comment more than a question. I think that this is an example of how your team has looked at other states and the experiences they've all had and learned from that. Because, as you and I talked about the other day, Colorado had a real problem with folks with the butane and all of that piece. And I think you've done that in all regulations. So I just commend you all on really paying attention to what other states have done well and what other states haven't done so well.
Thank
and
you.
Bring us better regulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments, and thank you for those excellent questions. Now I would like to actually present Resolution 2021-06A. It's a resolution to permit the Office of Cannabis Management to file the proposed regulatory language for home cultivation of medical cannabis.
I
Any
move
additional
approval.
questions? You're
Sorry, move
I'm sorry.
approval.
We have a motion. Second, please.
I'll second.
Metzger. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Excellent. None opposed, no abstentions. I will now turn the floor over to the Office of Cannabis Management's Executive Director, Chris Alexander, to provide his executive report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to focus this report on the expungement, vacature, and resentencing provisions that were included in the MRTA that this office has prioritized. The MRTA reformed New York's criminal justice system and strives to end decades of disproportionate enforcement of New York's marijuana laws. A key component of these reforms is for individuals with previous convictions for activities that are no longer criminalized. No one should have records for the same activities that are now legalized and businesses are generating profits from. Under the MRTA, the expungement process is automatic and requires no additional action by the individual. However, the relevant agencies have a 2-year time frame to establish the necessary tools to execute that action. There's a similar time frame that was provided to the expungement authorized by the 2019 legislation. There were approximately 198,000 record expungements accomplished as part of the first round of marijuana expungements for the 2019 legislation, which I was very proud to be a part of. Building upon the 2019 measure, approximately 203,000 cannabis-related charges are presently being suppressed from criminal background searches and are in process of being expunged. When completed, the actions of these measures will have expunged the records of over 400,000 New Yorkers, a staggering reminder of the impact that cannabis prohibition had on so many. The Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, or DOCS, also provided a clear breakdown of the impact of the reforms to New York State's Criminal Procedure Law Section 440.46 on individuals that were in its custody or under community supervision. All individuals who were in custody for solely a marijuana conviction have been released from custody and have had those convictions expunged. 34 individuals currently remain in custody or under supervision due to having an additional crime of conviction. In those cases, however, the marijuana conviction was expunged, but the additional crimes of conviction prevent their release. I would also note that an additional 413 local probation or split sentences were vacated as a result of the MRTA. This office will continue working with state and local partners to ensure a smooth process for this work. More information will be available at the URL noted in the slide above and on the Office of Court Administration's website. We will make sure to update the OCM website to include a link to this information as well. A reminder that the MRTA includes express provisions to ensure that these individuals, the people behind these statistics, are prioritized for inclusion in the new industry and we are working to create. Our work here is far from done, and I look forward to providing additional updates in this regard moving forward. Next, I'd like to provide an update as relates to the municipal opt-out. Cities, towns, and villages may pass a local law opting out of adult use cannabis retail dispensaries and/or on-site consumption businesses from operating in their jurisdiction. Per the MRTA, local laws opting out must be passed by December 31st, 2021. Municipalities that opt out may, however, opt back in at any time. One point I want to make quite clear: municipalities are prohibited from opting out of other license types or adult use legalization itself, meaning the consumption of cannabis by individuals 21 and over is legal regardless of whether or not the municipality opts out. Municipalities have reasonable control over provisions governing the local zoning and time, place, and manner restrictions of cannabis licenses operating in their jurisdiction, and municipalities that opt out will not receive any. However, municipalities that opt out will not receive any revenue from the local excise tax on the sale of adult use cannabis products, as there will be no businesses operating in their jurisdiction. The collection of this information is very important, as it will help map where these license types can locate once the application process starts. The information requested will include the name from the municipality, will include the name of the municipality, a copy or link to the local law opting out, and contact information for the municipal officer or clerk submitting the information. Please look out for further updates from this office of how to submit a local opt-out decision.
Thank you, Chris. We are incredibly proud of the work that New York State has done through the expungement of cannabis-related crimes, and we look forward to the continued update on both matters. Thank you. As a reminder, the OCM website, cannabis.ny.gov, is live. The website is home to key overviews, fact sheets, and lots of helpful information. As pictured here on the slide, the homepage provides you a form to sign up for updates from the office. You can even tailor the updates to specific to your interest and how frequently you'd like to receive updates. So please sign up and continue to check in with us for information. Please note that the time, location, and a live stream link will be shared on cannabisny.gov in advance of the next Cannabis Control Board meeting. A recording of today's meeting, the meeting minutes, and a transcript will be posted as well. All right, so that concludes today's business, and I thank you all for your participation. We are now adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for telling me.
Hey, how
Okay,
you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Right. So, we just finished watching the Cannabis Control Board meet. I think Dr. Robinson is going to join us, so bear with me a quick second. I just want to send him the link. But while I'm doing that, what were your thoughts about the meeting?
Well, I mean, I'm still waiting to hear about, other parts and waiting to find out when they're going to schedule hearings, so that they can actually hear from
Mhm.
the communities around the state. So
Mhm.
that's what I'm interested in.
Mhm.
So let me see. Is this going to be an hour or is this going to be
No, this is
a
going to
short
be
show?
as long as we have to talk about it. I don't think they didn't go an hour, so we certainly can't spend an hour talking about what they only talked about for half an hour. So,
How about that?
right. But
Okay.
I do think we can talk a little bit about other topics. I know that you had sent me an article talking about can big cannabis be good, and I wanted to talk about that. But let's first I want to just kind of go over what they did talk about today. So starting out, I think this format of doing the virtual meetings, it seems to be temporary. They had a law, I guess, enacted in September that allowed them to do it, but they also mentioned that the law sunsets on January 15th of 2022. So
Mhm.
I actually like the transparency of us being able to see and watch it. So I would hope that this is actually something that they continue to do into the new year so that we can, like we're doing now, kind of monitor the progress, get the information, straight from the panel as far as where things are going. So let's see. They talked a lot about home grow for medical purposes. And so, yeah, so they've come out with some standards that they're going to publish. There's going to be a 60-day period for commenting on it. And what they're more or less saying is that anybody who is a certified medical patient, 25 years or older, can grow up to 6 plants, 3 mature and 3 immature, no more than 12 plants per household. And designated caregivers can also cultivate. And if caregivers are cultivating for multiple patients, they can cultivate an additional plant per patient. They also mentioned that this also provides that cultivation can be done outside as well as inside. Um, and they mentioned that landlords cannot discriminate against people who are participating in the program. They did mention that there are probably some caveats and that landlords can probably include provisions in their leases, but I don't think they can add them to leases now. So that's interesting. Um, and then they talked a little bit about the expungement that's been done. And those numbers are that there are 198,000 records that have already been expunged for marijuana arrests, and there's another 203,000 in process. So when they're done, they will have expunged over 400,000 New Yorkers will have had those records erased and will have been released from jail. So that's a big win, and I'll salute them for that. That's obviously one of the more important things we wanted to get done. But as you mentioned, I think we are still trying to get more of a handle on what's going to happen in terms of the actual business part of this coming online.
Absolutely. I mean, of course, we're deeply concerned about economic equity, and
Mhm.
I fail to see how that's going to happen if day one funds aren't made available to communities that have been most harmed so that they can be incubated and their businesses and be provided with startup funds. Low interest, no interest forgivable loans, the same way funds were dispensed to businesses and institutions throughout the United States during the pandemic. So our pandemic lasted over 5 decades. We're still suffering from that pandemic. We're still suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome. And a lot of our people have been incarcerated, have died, have been terrorized by the war on drugs. And for those reasons, it just stands to reason that we should be provided with the funds that we need to be able to jump into this space and profit from it.
So Dr. Robinson has joined us. We were just recapping a little bit about the Cannabis Control Board meeting. So just some of your initial thoughts about it?
Well, I think you were just discussing the expungement provisions.
Yes.
And I was very glad to see that they it sounds like they've hit the ground running. And even though a lot of the automatic expungements won't be implemented for 2 years out, it seems that they've already done some expungements under a 2019 law. And they anticipate that it's something like nearly 400,000 records will be expunged. And it just goes to show the devastating impact that the criminalization of cannabis has had on which communities. So I'm glad to see that they've been really aggressive and proactive in that regards. So that was very good. I did. I was a little distressed to see or to hear that they had passed a resolution. I think ratifying the hiring of 21 individuals for various positions within the Cannabis Control Board. I would have liked to have seen that, and I would have liked to have seen where the portal is for the employment categories that they are seeking to staff. And I didn't see that. And it also suggests that they are moving rapidly to build out the staff in that area. So I'd be very interested in seeing those announcements and those staff positions.
Now, you also mentioned the fact that we didn't hear from the newly appointed chief equity officer.
That's right, and I think that given the fact that there's been so much emphasis on social equity in the MRTA, which is a tremendous thing, which is very, very good, and in some regards, it puts New York State in the forefront in terms of actually placing equity issues within the fabric of the very law itself. I think that that's very important. But there are many ways and to implement that, and I think that is an issue that needs to be very carefully watched. And so I would have been very much interested in hearing at least the first report of the chief equity officer within the Office of Cannabis Management.
And they did not mention when they're meeting again, or do we even know what their schedule is for meeting? Is it monthly? Because this is the second meeting they had this month, but I don't know if that's a necessary schedule or not.
I don't know, but on their website they clearly say that you can sign up for announcements and to find out when they're having their scheduled meeting. That's how I found out about this one because I'd signed up for it. So I really do applaud that. At least at the outset, they seem to be really living up to their commitment to openness and transparency.
Yeah, I'm hoping that that continues, because one of the things that I noted, they talked about the reason for doing it, and I guess they had to amend the law to allow them to have a virtual meeting instead of a public physical one. But they also mentioned that that law sunsets on January 15th of 2022, which is really not that long away. So going into the next year, it seems like we may not see the same level of transparency afterwards. But I did think that this format worked. And I like the fact that we were able to watch it and immediately kind of look and respond to it, and also be caught up to date about what is, where the resolutions are. We know that, for the home grow for medical resolutions, there's going to be a 60-day comment period, and those comments are going to be posted on the website, and they will give us opportunity to give commentary. Now, did you have any thoughts on the home grow regulations for medical?
Well, the in terms of the outlines, I think it's certainly, I'm very glad to see within the framework that they are allowing the home grows for medical, because that always can serve as an inhibitor for the unbridled monopoly on medical cannabis on the part of the large corporations, MSOs.
Mm-hmm.
I think having patients have access to grow their own medications, I think, is a very, very important component, and I'm glad that it's there in the law. I also think that there is an opportunity that really needs to be explored in terms of the ability of caregivers to grow for patients. And, that does, I think, open the opportunity for the development of patient care cooperatives, which can be another avenue for participation in the industry that doesn't have all of the major capital requirements that may need to be in place for other of the licensed niches within the cannabis industry. And I think that really needs to be explored, because I think it is an opportunity for a group of caregivers to band together to set up a grow operation. And each of those caregivers can grow 6+1 plants for their patients. So I think caregivers may be allowed to have 2 patients. So if you've got a cooperative of a number of caregivers, you can have a reasonably sized farm to grow for a designated cohort of patients. And I think that's another way to leverage into the industry.
Mm-hmm. We had a comment from one of our listeners who felt like that the 60-day public comment is too long. It's a waste of time, and it's delaying us from actually getting the medical resources to patients. I just wanted to respond to it, and I think, and I am not sure about that, but I think that 60-day period is something that is a statutory requirement in terms of their process. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I think that that's the reason for it. But I do agree that the sooner that we can get the medical cannabis in people's hands and give people the opportunity to do home grow is the better. And I also agree with Dr. Robinson that taking away from the MSOs they've been in place for years already, and we still don't even have dispensaries in most of the neighborhoods of color, and there's no real indication that they're looking at actually addressing what are the medical problems that are people having, and producing accordingly for that. So I feel like home grow is going to allow individual patients to try to cultivate cannabis that is directed toward what their own problems are.
And in a lot of these businesses, there are probably analytical studies that do a lot of preparatory work that can make the determination about where to site different business outlets, about what kind of infrastructure is necessary to support the business outlets. And I'm sure these MSOs have that in terms of what they're using to determine where they are locating the dispensaries. But also, I think that, organizations like Medgar Evers, which has now established a minor in cannabis studies, to help try to encourage on communities of color to get the background training to enable them to participate in the cannabis industry at a level higher than just consumers. I think that they should also, and a lot of the institutions within CUNY, et cetera, should also be prodded to develop these kinds of business studies that are more adaptable for use and applicable to communities of color. To look at what kind of organization or economic formation is best suitable and culturally appropriate for communities of color, and to develop the particular kinds of handcrafted industry that will best serve these communities of color. And I think that there's a role for these kinds of think tanks to do that kind of planning. That would be of great assistance to help march out the participation and utilization of medicinal cannabis.
I want to go back to Regina, and I think that the talk about the multi-state operators kind of segues into a conversation that Regina has been continuing to have. She had sent me a copy of an article. It was an interview with the CEO of Curaleaf, and the gist of the article was that big cannabis can be good cannabis. And I thought it was kind of a soft piece, and I didn't really see that they necessarily presented any evidence in that direction. But Regina, what are your thoughts on big cannabis being good cannabis?
I'm more concerned about the most harmed communities and individuals profiting from this industry. We experienced a tremendous amount of pain, and I'd like to see us profit. So big cannabis is going to do what big cannabis does, and that is try to increase their market reach, maximize the return on shareholders' investments, and that may not necessarily benefit those of us in our communities that have been harmed. So I know that that particular MSO has been working with minorities that are producing products that they will place on their shelves, in their dispensaries and on their websites, and that they will help to bring to market, and then will market and sell those products. And I think that's a good thing. But I think that we can't be limited to shelf space in dispensaries that are owned by these huge MSOs. We need to cultivate on a large scale. We need to create thousands of Black-owned businesses here in New York State. The wealth gap, the income gap is horrendous. It has been for quite some time, and it hasn't gotten any better. It just continues to get worse. So we need to have huge businesses. We need to have cultivators. We need to have dispensaries. We need to have thousands of businesses that are generating millions of dollars and billions of dollars that in turn around and hire people from our communities, because that's incredibly important to the welfare of a community, the well-being of a community, to the community's health, the quality of education that we get, the type of policing that we get, is all intertwined. So while, yes, they're making huge moves and they're at an advantage because they have a tremendous amount of money, we need to be advantaged such that our communities are held exclusively for our entrepreneurs to sell, and that they not be limited to selling within our communities. So those are one of the things that we've called for. We need to have an incubation period where our businesses are allowed to start their businesses, sustain them, and then grow. So I think that all of these things need to happen. And if they don't happen, then yes, these huge MSOs are going to monopolize the industry, and Black people will be in the position that we've been in, and that is as consumers who basically just get the crumbs when it comes to industry. So those are the issues that I have, and those are the concerns that I have.
One of the things they also mentioned was in regard to the conversation about people whose records have been expunged, is that they would get some sort of priority in terms of being able to be brought into the industry. But that's a very vague statement, and there's very little understanding of how that actually is supposed to occur. So do you have any thoughts on that process, Regina?
Yes, I mean, I'm concerned. I don't know who was hired I don't know anything about the individual who was hired to oversee workforce development, because that's what you're talking about, workforce development and jobs. Mm-hmm. And again, our focus has been on creating businesses. Mm-hmm. But for those individuals who are seeking to come out and to gain employment, no, the person who heads up workforce development has to be real clear about how important culture is, and how it is important, how important it is that the organizations that are engaged to do this training are culturally competent and culturally sensitive to the individuals who are returning home, who have been in this space working for criminal justice and social justice for decades. So I don't know how that's going to unfold. We don't know who this individual is who was appointed. Y'all spoke briefly about, the fact that, they brought people on, they've hired them. We don't know who they are, what their backgrounds are, what their mindset is. And I'm really looking for opportunities to hear, to interact with the board members and to share with them our concerns, because I'm not clear that a lot of these people have any idea what we are concerned about and what we believe needs to happen in order to see some real economic empowerment and equity within our community. So let me leave it there.
Okay.
Well, I think that there's really an opportunity to try to forge direct links to the people on the Office of Cannabis Control, the chairwoman and the others, to feed input to them to raise these issues, to let them know what we are concerned about. And that's why I was a little disappointed not to hear from the chief equity officer, because I think a lot of these issues in terms of focusing on the formerly incarcerated, people who had been predated by the criminal justice system, who had been used as cannon fodder in the war on drugs, to fill the coffers of the prisons and the prison industrial complex, or the school to prison pipeline. That the chief equity officer is really critical in terms of outlining exactly what kind of shape that kind of restorative justice and reparative economics will take. Now, I think that it's really in the struggle between uh, government and business. It's really a tug of war, and all too often it's business that ends up on top in the struggle between government and business. But I think that since we understand that the very foundations of this new industry arise out of the devastation wreaked across communities of color, so I think this industry, as opposed to any others, really has a very critical social obligation to contribute to the reparations of those communities that have been devastated. So the social equity component is crucial, and I think that when these MSOs want to step up beyond their engagement in medicinal cannabis, I think it should be within the power of the Cannabis Control Management and Office of the board to insist that these MSOs develop their own social equity programs and to outline the specific parameters that must be covered in these social equity programs if they want to do business in the state. That has to cover, on funding for enterprises in minority communities, having certain economic and employment opportunities for targeting the formerly incarcerated or other people from these underrepresented communities, having training programs to help people get involved in these in the industry. And I think that if the state were, really aggressive enough, it could insist that these corporations have these programs in place if they want to do business in the state.
Yeah, so I think that we've seen. I definitely applaud them for at least getting things started. After basically sitting 6 months with Andrew Cuomo and having nothing going. I'm glad to see that we've got things underway. I think based on what we've seen, it's really going to be incumbent upon us to continue to monitor the progress, to give commentary at every point. We are certainly going to try to reach out and see if we can get some of these key personnel, such as the chief equity officer and Chris Alexander. I would like to see if we could get him on the show to talk as well. But we really need to hear directly from some of these officials in terms of what their specific programs are going to be, because the issue that I think, and I give credit to Regina, she's talked about this issue way before we got here. This is not something that she woke up this morning to talk about, which is the fact that when we're starting at an uneven starting line, the multi-service, multi-state operators already have capital. They've got, equipment, they've got people in place, and they have a game plan. And in looking at the article from the CEO of Curaleaf, they're planning 3 to 5 years out. They're looking at the trends, they're looking at how they can position themselves. We're trying to get into the industry. We don't even have a framework for how businesses can participate yet. And you already have some who are already out of the starting gate and marking their territory. And as she's mentioned, that territory, if that territory extends into community of color, that those MSOs are taking away opportunities that really need to be directed and shepherded for the communities that have been most harmed. And that has been the bottom line all the time. And even as New York positions itself to have the best social equity program, unless it delivers the results, then we can just see a repeat of what's happened in other states. Is that we don't want to see a bunch of businesses get started up, and then there's a lack of capital available to them, The revenue from taxes is not going to be available to anybody for years now. And so, how can we actually get a foothold in the industry if there's no day one funding? And I think that question, we still have to keep that question in front of us. Yeah.
There was another point that was raised during the meeting, and that was, and I saw it pop up about purchasing the seeds from the ROs.
Yes. One of our
that was interesting.
Right. One of our commentators brought that up and mentioned that they felt that this is a horrible decision. And it is curious because, once again, it puts them at the top of the supply chain. Why are the registered organizations, why would those be the only legitimate sources for seeds? And I guess because they are already in the medical program, but I have an issue with the fact that we really need from the medical side, and I like your thoughts on this, Dr. Robinson. We're just scratching the surface of even the research on what strains are effective with which ailments. And I really think that there needs to be a more inclusive process, especially for home grow, because I think as home grow starts to proliferate, people are going to want to specifically hone in on what their issue is. And I don't see that information or knowledge is necessarily forthcoming from these MSOs. None of them, as far as I've seen, have demonstrated that they have identified particular strains for particular ailments. What are your thoughts?
Well, because it is federally illegal and because we have an FDA framework set up, in order to make a claim that a particular strain is good for a particular ailment, it needs to go through a rigorous review process. And that's something that, verges on a lot of expense to do clinical trials, testing, et cetera, to make that verification.
Mm-hmm.
And it is something, that is a separate issue, and that is a very complicated issue in terms of making established medical claims for a particular strain for a particular illness.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is that everybody's endocannabinoid system is fairly unique, and a strain that works for one person to relieve their arthritis pain may or may not work for another person. That's why patients often take 3 to 4 months to find exactly the right strain that works for their particular condition. And you can get a hint that, a particular strain may work for a patient for their inflammatory bowel disease, but that same strain may not work for another individual with exactly the same diagnosis. So there's a lot of trial and error in terms of, basically handcrafting which particular strain works for what disease in what patient. So that's one thing. I had a chance to review the legislation before, attending the meeting, and I noticed that there is a lot of missed opportunity in terms of addressing the affirmative and positive benefit of medicinal cannabis in particular. A lot of the focus in the legislation is on, one, preventing abuse, and preventing the harms of the psychoactive or neurologic impairment. And they set up a framework to do community-wide education about appropriate drug use, drug safety, preventing it from falling into the hands of minors, etc. And they also have specifically laid out a particular research agenda for looking at the potential impairment of cannabis in hazardous occupations, driving, etc. But nothing at all looking at how the state is going to fund medical research in terms of the medicinal benefits of cannabis, which is a woeful and a very, very sad missed opportunity. And I think that that gap will be filled. Not necessarily by the MSOs, but I do think that as the climate changes, as the stigma is reduced, that there may be a few adventuresome academic institutions that may decide to get involved with clinical research, and that's where we may find it. But it's going to be so much more delayed than if the state had really affirmatively put that into the legislation.
Well, do you think that this is something that the board and can take a proactive role into facilitating partnerships with some of these institutions? Medgar Evers is obviously one of them. I believe SUNY Potsdam is also developing programs, and it seems that if these institutions are going in, they could be a valuable source for facilitating the research. And I think that in that process, maybe that's also a place where we can start to see, some of the seed development, that would be independent of the registered organizations.
I really hope so.
Mhm.
Because what's happened in other states in their legal framework is that at least initially when legalization set in, the availability of some of those minor strains for patient use really dried up as all these organizations moved to service the adult market. The needs of the adult market are vastly different than the medical market, and with people focusing on other kinds of issues in terms of the psychoactive effects, which may have a narrower spectrum of cannabinoids and terpenoids, as opposed to the full range of cannabinoids and terpenoids that may be of medicinal benefit. I see that there is comments here on the line about that even now some of the medical strains are not available that can best serve patients, and that is an unfortunate thing. In a much wider market, when, for example, in the California experience, they've had nearly 15 years of medicinal only cannabis, and they had a whole range of growers that could develop little niche strains or chemovars that could be effective in different kinds of clinical conditions. Unfortunately, even in that market, which was fairly mature in terms of the medical market, once legalization came in, those strains were particularly scarce. So I think that without protections for the medicinal strains, that may happen here in New York as well.
I also feel like this might be an opportunity for smaller scale cultivators to participate on the medical side, where if we had that framework where collectively being involved with, say, a research institution, that we could cultivate those Black and brown minority farmers to be able to develop specific strains for specific ailments. As you said, that micro targeting probably works better on the medical side. On the adult use side, they're probably just looking for developing a few big brands, and they're looking more at the psychoactive properties than they are at the medical properties, and what are the different cannabinoids and terpenes. So it might very well be that that direction could also facilitate that those smaller scale growers and cultivators that could participate well in the industry and coexist with the MSOs.
Yeah, in the legislation, they have established, sort of like cannabis revenue funds, and certain percent goes to this, certain percent goes to that, a certain percent goes to, a small percent goes to law enforcement, another percent goes to looking at funding research in terms of helping to categorize impairment. Um, I do think that part of the revenue stream from the MSOs that are in the adult market, a good chunk of that should be returned to the state to set up a medical research fund in cannabis, so that these funds can be used specifically for that, and that academic institutions and other community-based organizations that are versed in doing community-based research can get access to those funds so that we can further that medicinal research.
Mm-hmm. So we've been joined now by Curtis Archer, aka DJ Leroy.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to join you. I'm actually coming from a meeting from the Malcolm X Betty Shabazz Center, just to talk about our reorg and how we're going to join this social equity conversation. But how's everybody doing?
Okay.
Good. How are you?
Good. So I'm assuming, because as you know, I'm late to the party, but we've just had the second Cannabis Commission meeting. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I take it that thoughts, or is it too early to say?
Well, we've been talking about our thoughts for a half an hour, so you're going to have to go back and check the tape on it. But the quick recap I'll give you is that they talked a lot about home grow for medical purposes,
Okay.
and they passed some guidelines that they're putting up for public comment, 60 days to comment on, and I would presume that after the 60-day period, they're going to look at revisions based on the comments, come back and come back to the board to basically finalize those. So I would expect that home grow for medical is something that we would see in the first quarter of 2022.
Gotcha.
They also talked about the expungements, of which about almost 200,000 have already been done. Another 200,000 plus are in the works. They still have up to 2 years, but I'm hoping they can do it quicker than that. And so those are full expungements released from prison. There's a handful of people who had other crimes that they were convicted with. So if you were convicted with another crime besides marijuana, you may still be in jail, but your marijuana arrest and record is expunged. And
Okay.
they made some comments about people who came out of this situation having an on-ramp into the new industry, but really were no specifics. Dr. Robinson correctly caught them on the fact that although the chief equity officer was scheduled on the agenda to talk, but we did not hear from the chief equity officer. So we're still waiting to hear more about what are the specifics that are going to put the teeth into the so-called social equity program.
Gotcha. And well, Night Watchman, you did mention something that kind of caught my attention. So in terms of records being fully expunged, and there also being a way or an avenue for those who had been touched by the criminal justice system to get into the new economy. Did I hear that correctly?
Well, they have said that, but we don't have any specifics about how that's going to occur.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
Regina, thoughts from you?
Overall thoughts, I mean, it's just a lot more that I would like shared with us in terms of, the individuals who are being hired, their cultural competencies and sensitivities to, the most harmed community. So I think as you know, should benefit tremendously from this legislation and from the potential revenues, billions of dollars, for most harmed communities across the state. Not crumbs. I'm waiting to see, how things unfold, and like to hear more about, the comments about what has been drafted thus far. Getting the seeds from the MSOs, what Dr. Robinson pointed out on the medical side, because of course I believe that we should be limited to MSOs to obtain these products within our we have dispensaries, we have black pharmacists who should be able to profit from these businesses. And for some of our members of our community, those are like their primary interface with the medical profession, their local pharmacists. So I think that that connection and that network needs to be utilized. And so, I have thoughts about how this can unfold in such a way that we actually enrich our community, as opposed to just, waiting to see how the industry at large, the MSOs, the ROs, just, come in here with wealth financed strategies and initiatives to just monopolize this thing. So I think that we have to be vigilant, and we have to be vocal, and we need to let them know how important it is that we get in first. We have exclusivity, we have the incubation period, and that we absolutely profit from this industry.
Well said. Dr. Robinson, do you have any closing thoughts?
Well, one of the things I've always pushed for, and I'm not sure exactly what the array of testing companies looks like in the state. I know that testing frameworks are set up basically first and foremost to assure the safety of the product, so that there's no contamination from solvents, chemicals, pesticides, etc., or any biological contaminants, molds, fungi, animal parts. And then to set up rudimentary potency testing in terms of looking at the percentages of THC, CBD, and other minor cannabinoids and terpenoids. But these are always a very restricted, narrow range. And I've worked already on advocated, and our organization, the Society of Cannabis Clinicians, has advocated that at least each state should set up at least one major reference laboratory in the state that will do the complete analysis, the full gamut of all the cannabinoids and terpenes of every product on sale in the state. Now, these products that they get from the manufacturers or the distributors have already passed the safety screen, so that they don't have to repeat the test for contaminants, etc. Although there should be reference labs to make sure that the other labs are following their protocols, standard operating procedures, and making sure that they are properly calibrated and that they are sufficient to detect these things. But beyond that, the reference lab would be able to really get an accurate portrayal of the existing strains that are in sale within the state at a much greater depth than the commercial labs are screening for, in terms of just making sure people can get the product at the door. This can help enable the state to identify those rare cannabinoids or terpenoid combinations that may have some medicinal benefit and may prove useful in the future that we don't even know about.
Doc, I have two quick questions. So, if you had to take a guesstimate in terms of the size of such a facility, such a testing lab, that's one. And two, whether or not this particular testing lab needs to be different than other, let's say, environmentally sterile labs, or can it be, I don't know, something that can be actually, let's say, set in the middle of an urban center, for instance, like Harlem?
Well, there's two things. The kind that you would want that could be set in a place like Harlem. I'm not sure exactly all of the industrial safety regulations that have to be applied, because they may be using volatile solvents, etc. So those are safety considerations in terms of the locations of the lab. But the kind of commercial lab is at one level, and they may be required to do a restricted level of analysis. The kind of analysis that I'm talking about is a laboratory that will have the reagents and the standards to test the full range of the cannabinoids over the 120 range of cannabinoids that the plant produces, and the 60 or 70 terpenoids that may be present in each of these compounds. And they will be just doing the kind of chemical fingerprinting of every kind of cannabinoid that's available for sale in the state. And that is far more extensive. And of course, they need to have, extraordinary quality control. Where they're located, I can't address that.
Okay, no worries. How about size?
Size. I don't know exactly how to even lay that out. This is going to be depending on how these are done. I mean, you can have regional labs that deal with particular upstate, downstate, western state regions to take all of this. So I really have no idea about that volume either. But I think that there are ample opportunities, as I addressed earlier, to get some business analytic think tank to look at these opportunities and to come up with proposals that can be funded by a state initiative.
I think we're the think tank right now.
Well, okay. I do think we need to have more kinds of expertise in hand to be able to really flesh out these full proposals. Mm-hmm. And they're certainly available. Yeah. They are available. It just takes money to identify the people and pay for their analytical firepower.
Mm-hmm. So I think we're going to wrap this up here. As I said, we're going to continue to stay on this. We're going to see if we can reach out and see if we can have some of either the Cannabis Control Board members or the executive director of the Office of Cannabis Management, or possibly the chief social equity officer. We are going to try to see if we can get them on the show. And if we can, of course, we will have you guys back so that we can ask some of these questions directly and just continue to get more information on the direction. And so we'll do our part to continue to have this platform available. And hopefully we will start to see this thing go in the direction it needs to go. So thank you, Regina Smith, Executive Director of Harlem Business Alliance. Thank you, Dr. Stephen Robinson, Executive Director of the Society of Cannabis Clinicians. And thank you, Curtis Archer, for showing up. Better late than never.
Take care, everybody.
All right.
Okay.
Folks. Thanks
All
so
right.
much. And continue to watch us on Soul Lounge Primetime and listen to us on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem.
So long.